I want to sort of take a different direction away from the pure consumer welfare thrust that I heard this afternoon, and talk a little about producer surplus as well, because in my opinion that's something we have to do in order to get long-term sustainable solution for our communications needs. So what am I saying? I think Rohit and someone else from your organization wrote perhaps about yes, pure consumer surplus, and I'm suggesting that maybe you should consider that it needs both producer plus consumer surplus, and I'm going to add a third entity here, which is maybe not in part of the economics accepted lexicon, but government as a stakeholder. Why? Because these are the three things that you have to deal with in reality for infrastructure of any sort to improve. And on that, I would say one thing. If you consider the problems that we are having with our communications networks, and you think about any service, say healthcare or banking or transportation, and you look at any of the points like the hospitals or airports, railway stations, you see the absolute crush when you have a good service in place. Everything is overwhelmed by sheer numbers. There's a good thing and a bad thing about our vast numbers. It's a great market because it's almost infinite, but it's horribly overpowering in terms of the actual numbers when you have all of them coming at you to take what it is that you're offering. And so you get very quickly a congestion, which is the problem we have, whether it's traffic, whether it's hospitals, whether it's banks, whether it's communications. Now, assuming that you will go along with my suggestion of thinking of these three stakeholder interests, that is consumer, producer, and government. If you look at a structure that tries to come up with in simple parlance we call win-win, but what that really means in game theory terms is moving away from Nash equilibrium to a better point. What is Nash equilibrium? When everybody pursues their own interest and you get a point from which nobody can move without anybody else moving. And that is the lowest possible equilibrium. Any accommodation that goes beyond this is an improvement. To give you a bad example, it's called cozy capitalism, where the producer sits with government and figures out a way to corner something, and you get much better producer surplus. But you can get more equitable situations where you have true collaborative approaches, and yes, they are relatively few, but I'm thinking of the Scandinavian models, and even in telecommunications they have them, where you get an approach of people coming together to try and solve the problem as a common problem rather than contending to see what they can get out of it. That's the difference, to try and take what you can out of it versus trying to solve the problem. Now, in the context of what we're talking about, one way of thinking about it is my favorite subject, spectrum. And let me give you two examples where policy changes can be done, in my opinion, immediately because there is no contention on it. And I'm a little sorry that Mr. Sharma left because I'll have to send him a note on this, which is take 60 gigahertz. Now 60 gigahertz is a proven technology, not in India, but elsewhere. What does it do? It does two things. One is Wi-Fi. It is an additional Wi-Fi band. The second thing it does is backhaul. What is backhaul? When you have an aggregation of points, whether it's wireless or wired, and you want to carry it over a distance to a fiber or another wireless microwave point, you can use a 60 gigahertz radio, which is available off the shelf. Do we have such things here? Not legally, and I don't know if they are anywhere in this country. Why not? I have no idea. Does the physics allow it? Most certainly. But now this is one of the things that I believe we should be addressing, and just doing, because what stands in the way? There's nobody sitting on that spectrum, so you don't have to vacate it. I'll give you a second example, and that is, there's a standard called 802.11ac, which is Wi-Fi using a very broad bandwidth, 80 megahertz. It's in the 5.8 gigahertz band. We already use 5.8 gigahertz, but we have only 50 megahertz, which is allowed as Wi-Fi in this country. But to use these products, you need 80 megahertz. Do we have it? We don't. Can we go to 802.11ac with 50 megahertz? In a restricted way, yeah. But what it means is we're constraining our ability to communicate simply by some arbitrary rules. Now, I don't know if there's an arm of government sitting on that spectrum in 5.8 gigahertz, but if there isn't, there's no logic for not allowing it. So that's the kind of thinking I'm talking about, of collaboratively working out solutions which can optimize your usage of the asset, meaning spectrum. And talking about arbitrary rules, I won't take too long. I'll just give you this other example, and then we can go on the principles. You'll recall that at the beginning of the offshore IT revolution began with a 64 kilobits line. The way it was facilitated was that somebody in government, and it was the Secretary DOT at the time, decided that they would allow a 64 kilobits line to an offshore point, which was not allowed before that. That allowed software companies to sit here and start doing stuff and sending it across. And that's the way it began. Because that has now led to TV on the one hand, where we have things like DTH, which is, I think, a pretty good product and available over most of the country. And we have internet broadband, which is not such a good product, much highly priced, and suffering from this capacity constraint, which is fragmented spectrum, limited spectrum, very expensive spectrum, etc., etc. About the economics of fiber or wired lines versus wireless, you need have no doubts about it. I have a financial background, by the way. I'm an ex-banker and investment banker. There's another banker there that I know, and there is no question that we cannot afford such things in this country. So it has to be a wireless solution, and the wireless does allow it. There is no problem now in wireless solutions. It is just that we have to have the approaches that empower it. Let me give you an example of why it's not possible. We're working on a unused broadcast spectrum trial at IIT Delhi and IIT Hyderabad. I'm associated with it. There's an Indian company that's a startup that has its own IPR for this so-called TV white space device. That company does not have permission to use the spectrum to test its device. Now you can imagine what that means. You're trying to put together a box, and you don't have permission to even use the air, to try it out. So those are the kinds of hurdles we're creating for ourselves, and I think it is a lack of ability to look at it as a constructive versus a what can I take out of it sort of approach. Okay, enough said.